Hello everyone. Um, this is a bit of a tiring video to make, but this is going to be a video nonetheless. Today I'm going to be talking about the mid-game free-to-play struggles that a lot of new players end up experiencing in this game. On the Stowe Reddit, I'm often considered the player that a decent amount of people go to if they're new in the game. And this is something that I haven't really covered before. In terms of around level 30 to 40, trying to crest over to level 65, because most of the guides in the game are for very, very new players to the game, or for players who are already at level 65 and have really terrible builds at that point. So yeah, in this video I'll talk about why that's the case, why veterans in the game don't encounter the issues that I'm going to be describing in this video, and why free-to-play players do. My sort of suggestions to get a little bit over that hump a little bit, and then one suggestion that Cryptic can also do to make it easier, because there was one thing that made me go crazy and spend a week trying to figure out an answer for, and I didn't find a satisfactory answer for it. But anyway, the time links for everything is going to be in the description, and let's get started. So first off, for reference here, I have put a couple of other pretty decent videos talking about stuff to help newer players to the game, tips for leveling, the away team setups made easy video. That's basically probably one of the better videos in the game at all for getting through ground combat in case you hate ground combat, as well as some brainstorming suggestions to at least start off with for budget beam builds and budget science builds. Definitely going for a more survival tanky route is probably more ideal for a lot of you, especially if you're newer to the game, because hey, if you can at least have a more survival oriented type of build, then you can transition to a more damaging type of one if that's your preferred playstyle a little bit later. Now, in the mid game though, a lot of the stuff in these videos don't really matter. Now, the away team says made easy video definitely matters. At level 30, you can apply the abilities from that, and then you can cruise through all of the content in this game just fine for ground combat. Space combat is an entirely different matter, though. In this mid-game range area, the game is often too high of a level to just brute force missions. Even if you have terrible bridge off your abilities, a lot of stuff below this, you can still cruise straight through it. However, you're too low level to use many of these suggestions for bridge off your abilities and specific consoles, traits, rotation things that are given on the STO Reddit or Stowe Reddit inside this game. So here's the thing. What's special about level 30 and why the game gets harder after this point is because at this point you kind of get maxed out on your bridge officer ability spiking potential. Because at this point you get your commander bridge officer abilities. And it's really just after level 30, level 40, and 50 that you might get starships that have more bridge officer abilities, but the bridge officer abilities aren't inherently stronger than what you're already going to be experiencing at this level. Without any additional power spikes, you're going to have to start being smarter about the bridge officer abilities that you're actually using. What this also means for free-to-play players is that the higher tier starships, besides their base stat values, aren't really that much stronger than what you're going to have at level 30. And since enemies continue to get harder and harder in this game, and your base power level isn't really going to be getting that much more powerful from that point, you're going to have to start fighting smarter in order to be able to beat those enemies, in terms of getting better builds to more optimize what's actually available on your later starships. Now, veteran players have a couple of things for an extra advantage on them outside of their raw experience, and that's that they are going to basically guarantee to have at least one scaling tier 6 starship, because all tier 6 starships scale now inside the game, and with all the various free starships from the summer events, winter events, anniversary events, and the most recent autumn event with the Alachi frigate, most of them are going to have at least one tier 6 starship at this point. And there's also the 3-part event for getting a free C-Store token for a C-Store Tier 6 starship as well, which would also fall in the scaling category too. What it basically means is most veteran players aren't going to be experiencing the, at level 10 I get this new starship that's slightly more powerful. A lot of the veteran players will stick with one starship and go through the entire leveling process with just that starship. Those starships also have scaling weapons as well, so that's something of an also advantage for those starships as well. Now again, for ground combat, this is generally the spikes for you. For level 1 to 9, you end up eventually with 4 officers and 4 abilities, because they have each officer only has one ability, and that's their ensign ability. At level 10, they get access to their lieutenant abilities, and because in ground combat they don't have any limitations on their abilities and when they can and can't use them, you have a total of 8 abilities to choose. At level 20, they get access to their lieutenant commanders, they get 12, and then at level 30, they have 16 abilities, because each one of them can use their commander abilities as well in ground combat. Which is also why, in a sense, if you want to actually think about this, in solo content, ground is actually much easier than space, because you have 16 abilities from your bridge officers, plus you have the 5 from your captain as well. In space combat, however, your bridge officers get much more limited in terms of their abilities based upon what seat and what type of seat that they're put into. So at the beginning, your level 1 starship just has 3 ensign seats. Sure, if you want to get a C-Store scaling starship or one of the other starships like the Prototype Walker, you might have more than that, but your default tutorial starship is just going to have 3 ensign seats with 3 weapons and 3 consoles. Tier 2, that goes up a little bit more with an ensign seat in there. At Tier 3, it goes up a little more with a lieutenant commander seat. And the weapons splits a little bit here because science starships have less weapons than the others. And then in Tier 4, you kind of start getting maxed out in terms of your weapons themselves. And then Tier 5, as you can see here, the difference isn't really that much between a Tier 4 and Tier 5 starship. The base stats, yes, is a little bit higher, but you don't change the amount of weapons, you just get 2 more console slots and 2 more bridge officer abilities in total. It's not really that much difference between a Tier 4 and Tier 5 starship. Now for Tier 5 to Tier 5U and Tier 6, there is a little bit of a difference. The free Tier 5s they're able to get inside the game from leveling are generally the more lackluster Tier 5s because they are lacking 1 console. If you actually look in the C-Store and actually see the differences in pricing for Tier 5s, there actually are 2 different prices for Tier 5s. There are the Tier 5s that cost 2,000 Zen, and the Tier 5s that cost 2,500 Zen. The 2,000 Zen Tier 5s are these ones with just 9 consoles, and the better Tier 5s cost 2,500 and they actually have 10 consoles, but otherwise they're basically the exact same. And then for Tier 5U, well, it depends on what type of Tier 5 this was over here, as to whether you get 10 or 11 consoles, but otherwise, and you get scaling stats from here. Tier 6 is unique in that they're able to be accessed right after the tutorial. They get 10 to 12 consoles because they're able to get 1 to 2 specialist seats, and if their commander seat is a Commander Miracle Worker, they get an additional console on their starships as well. They also get 1 extra bridge officer ability as well, above what Tier 5 starships can actually give you too. So, with that all said, Tier 6 typically has a lot of nice things going for them. Now for the free starships for each faction, here is what they are. Now I'm not going to be listing the Dominion ones just because the Dominion level 61 one is just what the Klingon and Federation ones are, and they have their tutorial starship, which is their own unique thing as well. And they start the game with that thing. For these, as you can see here, Federation and Klingon Empire isn't really too much different. For both, you have a cruiser type vessel and an escort type vessel. The difference is that the Klingon Empire has a bird of prey or a raider instead of a science vessel. So if you really want to play science while you're leveling as the Klingon Empire, you'll have to choose the bird of prey because it has the more flexible bridge officer seating to pull it off. Around the Republic, you unfortunately can't do space science builds with the free starships because you don't really have that flexibility like at all with the one starship that you have until level 30, which you have 2 to choose from. As we get into the actual tier 5 tokens, there are 2 different tier 5 tokens that you get inside this game. One at level 40 and one at level 61. The difference between the 2 tokens is that the level 40 token only works for these starships in this level 40 category that I'm highlighting here. The level 61 token does work for all of those level 40 starships, but also works for these select amount of starships here that normally you have to pay Zen in order to get inside of the game. Keep in mind, if you do use a level 61 token for one of these Zen starships, depending on your faction as to which ones you have access to, it does not account unlock that Zen starship. It just unlocks that Zen starship for that particular character that used that level 61 tier 5 token. Just keep that in mind. Now when it comes to these starships, most of the level 61 starships, in my opinion, are stronger. The exceptions is the Assault Cruiser for Federation and the Science Warbird for Roman Republic. In my opinion, the Exploration Cruiser Retrofit is just really weak, which is why the Assault Cruiser is better. And then for the Roman Republic, this Science Warbird is the only science starship of all these starships here, so yeah, this one's going to be the one to go for. Now, before I get into my suggestions for the bridge officer layout, my rules here is that the bridge officer abilities have to be available inherently from the beginning of the game, available from the bridge officer trainer. Feel free to see that Leveling Captain Top 5 tips as to where to find the bridge officer trainers inside of the game. I do describe how to get to them in that video, so if you're curious, just follow the link in the top of the video, and you'll be able to go right to that moment in that video. So here are all the abilities for the trainer for tactical. You've only got one ability for commander, which kind of sucks, frankly, but you have a decent amount for the other 3 slots there. I have colored here the ones that I feel are pretty good. Now keep in mind, the one thing I did forget to neglect in this video is that Beam Overload is also pretty decent. There has been a recent significant buff to Beam Overload, and that now is a significant increase in damage for a few seconds instead of the old. It enhances the next shot, and then it's over. So Beam Overload is actually pretty decent for single target damage, just like Cannon of Rapid Fire is very good single target for cannons inside this game. For engineering, a lot of these abilities are actually pretty good. For those of you that are veterans, I don't have Ox to Battery 1 and 2 here highlighted, just because the value from that ability comes from a particular set of 3 duty officers, which are not really in the super budget level, in my opinion. And also, you have to get them generally off the exchange anyway for very new players to the game. And for science, this is actually the only one that I think actually has a decent commander ability, because you get Gravity Well 2 there. So science is actually probably some of the strongest stuff available, frankly, from the trainer inherently. I mean, there's also a lot more science abilities, so that's probably why, but there are a lot of decent options here too. Alright, so for the starships themselves, there's the Assault Cruiser and the Orion Marauder Flight Deck Carrier. So Cruiser, we have Aceton Beam 2 here, just because we don't have access to Reverse Shield Polarity 3 from the trainer. Aceton Beam does do a little bit of damage, and it also reduces the damage from the enemy that you hit it with. For those of you that are veteran players, think of this like a budget version of Suppression Barrage that can be put on any engineering bridge officer seat effective. As long as that's Lieutenant Commander or higher, you'll be able to use this ability. Reverse Shield Polarity, Ox to Structural Integrity Field, and Engineering Team. And then Marin's Power to Shields 1, Marin's Power to Weapons 2, and Directed Energy Modulation 2. Veteran players will probably use emergency-powered engines one because there's some other synergies with emergency-powered engines. Especially when leveling, emergency-powered shields is just better. Just what it comes down to. It adds a lot more survivability. And then because it's a beam build, beam firewall 1 with attack pattern beta and tactical team. You definitely can, instead, if you don't care about attack pattern beta as much, do torpedo spread and beam firewall 2 here as well. It's totally your choice, and it's totally fine either way. And then for the science slot, hazard measures 1 and then photonic officer 1, just to help with cooldowns. And as you can see here, for the Run Marauder flight deck carrier, that stuff's basically the same here, except we don't have an ensign tactical. Instead, it's ensign science. So we're stuck with just tactical team and beam firewall, and we have transfer shield strength here just for an extra survivability. If you think that's good enough to replace tactical team, you could put torpedo spread there as well. For the Daedalus Warbird Battlecruiser retrofit, I actually suggest using cannons instead of beams for the ship, just because you've got a Commander Engineering with a Lieutenant Commander Tactical and a Lieutenant Commander Science on this ship. So you have the ability to use Gravity Well 1 and basically suck a lot of enemies into the front of your ship so that it's really easy to keep the cannons on your ship in that narrowish firing arc in front of your ship to attack them fairly easily. So it's actually a unique situation there. Also, just keep in mind, both of these ships here can use dual cannons. The Assault Cruiser cannot. It's one of the things in a video I'll be releasing probably in like 2 or 3 weeks. I'll talk about something to change in this game, just to make it simpler for everyone. This is going to be one of the things. But anyway, I think that the Daedalus is actually pretty decent for a cruiser for those specific aspects there. Now, for our more tactical-oriented damage builds. Generally, this is going to be the Escort class. The Carfree Battle Carrier is the exception. I actually do feel, if you're going for a more tactical-oriented version for a Klingon captain, this ship is actually the more optimal ship to choose as a free-to-play player. Now, technically, you are down one weapon versus these other ships. The weapon you're down is the experimental weapon, which isn't really the biggest DPS weapon in the game, frankly. Even though this is technically a Commander Science starship, if you ignore that seat and compare it to other ships in the game, this is effectively a tactical dreadnought carrier in every other sense of how this ship works. Its stats line up fairly well. It's got a fairly high offensive-oriented layout for its bridge officer seating. It's got 5 tactical abilities along with 5 science. Very high base stats. Plus, it's got 2 hangar bays, so you're losing that experimental weapon on this ship in order to get 2 hangar bays and very high base stats versus other escorts inside the game. So I think this one's actually really good. But again, it's really up to you. For tactical escort retrofit, I was kind of running out of tactical abilities to use. So I put tactical team there twice. Maybe a targeting subsystems might be a better slot for this last tactical ability. Feel free to let me know in the comments as to your thoughts. The Warbird retrofit, I was debating between this one and the Tier 5 Morgu. I ended up going with this one just because you get to use Gravity Well with this starship. If you're going for just raw stats, inherently, the Morgu is much better. So if you're slightly more experienced and don't need Gravity Well to do well with cannons, then you can go with the Morgu and have a little bit higher HP on your starship. Now for the science vessels themselves, the other controversial thing here is I didn't put the Volkuv carrier here. And I put the Gorn vessel here instead. The reason is because generally for a lot of science starships, especially at the budget end, a lot of your damage is coming from your secondary deflector, combined with what your damaging science abilities are going to be. And so the Volkuv carrier doesn't have a secondary deflector. So a general science vessel is going to perform a lot better. Additionally, for Federation, the Tier 5 Voyager version is a really nice starship. You do get the ablative hull console from the C store here with the starship itself. So especially whenever you ideally are going to transition to a science torpedo build with this starship, that console literally just becomes a kind of get out of jail free survival console. So that is really nice. The Warbird here, pretty standard science vessel that happens to have a battle cloak. So that's nice too. So anyway, for weapon types for beginners, you can feel free to see and read the stuff over here and pause the video if you're curious about that, or you can read some of the stuff from my other videos and you'll probably get a lot of the same thing. Especially for mid-game stuff for builds, you probably still starting to use it in terms of what you might want, but to keep things simple, for beam builds, my recommendation is 3 beams in the front with one torpedo as well, and then in the back you're going to have 3 beam arrays as well with 1 mine launcher. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to attack from the sides of your ship, in the sides 70 degrees, where your beams from both the front and the back of your ship are able to hit those enemies on the sides of your ship. You can almost think of it as like, oh man, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but you can think of it almost like it's like a Pirates of the Caribbean-esque type of like battleship, or like, I don't know, ship in the sea, in which like most of your like weapons are literally on the sides, and so ideally you're going to want to move your ship to the side, just so that the sides of your starship are going right at the enemy. You can think of it kind of like that as to why you're trying to hit them from the sides instead of the front of your starship. Now, if you want to hit from the front of your starship, like for instance the Defiance, what you want to do instead is either use dual cannons or single cannons, 3 of them in the front with 1 torpedo, and then combine that with 3 turrets and a mine launcher in the back, and you'll want to attack from the front. If you use dual cannons, it's a 45-degree arc in the front of your starship, which is pretty narrow. Or if you want to use single cannons, which do less damage, but you have a much more forgiving firing arc to hit enemies in. For newer players to the game, I highly recommend single cannons. I've talked about them in another video as well about why single cannons. But a lot of it is for ease of being able to hit enemies, which is nice in PvP, but I mean, in PvE, it's also nice too. To not have to worry as much about, man, they just moved right out of my really narrow arc in the front of my starship. Single cannons, that's not as much of an issue. Now for science builds, unfortunately, like what makes science builds really nice for science torp builds is the Dyson Reputations Gravimetric Torpedo, the Delta Reputations Neutron Torpedo, and the Particle Emission Plasma Torpedo from R&D 15's crafting system itself inside of the game. So until you get to that point, which is level 65 by the way, you're generally going to want to use energy weapons on your starship until you get to those torpedoes to switch them out. To help with training you to get in those somewhat narrow arcs in the front of your starship for both your science abilities as well as for your torpedoes, my recommendation, even though yes, it's not optimal from an energy standpoint, is to use 2 dual beam banks in the front of your starship combined with a torpedo. Science vessels just have 6 weapons instead of 8 generally for your free science vessels. And then in the back, just use 2 turrets plus a mine launcher. Yes, dual beam banks and turrets are not synergistic, but you're not going to keep them for a super long time. So, in my opinion, it's fine. You'll eventually switch to what I say in the budget science tank videos, just as an FYI, is what I would highly suggest, at least to start off with. And then you'll be nice and good to go. Now for weapon and console locations, we're not going to be using missions to rely upon with this. I'm not using RNG either, because ideally if you're a brand new player to the game, you're going to want to be doing the missions in order from after your tutorial, and just going sequentially through the mission journal. Because as a brand new player, that's a decent way to get a general grasp on what's actually going on in the general big storylines inside the game. There are a couple of storylines that were pulled out that you'll have to go back to later because Cryptic was kind of silly and took them out. But outside of that, if you're struggling with weapons, especially getting towards some of the 40 to 50 levels, my recommendation is to go to most of the NPC vendors in the game and just buy common Mark 9 weapons. It only costs about 14,000 energy credits, which really isn't that much. And you can get whatever type, intercept type that you need for whatever build that you want. And so it's not really that terrible. The bigger problems, frankly, is that because it's the highest available from vendors is common Mark 9. Once you get to level 47, your equipment starts to get outscaled, which kind of sucks. And additionally, there realistically aren't any NPC vendors that I could find that sell engineering consoles, science consoles, or tactical consoles, which is a pretty decent problem. And I did search a lot of places. This is just a list of some of the places that I searched. I searched a lot more than this over the past week. And yeah, I had this video about prepped a week ago, but I spent another week trying to find an NPC vendor that sold consoles. Because I was like, there's gotta be one in this game, right? But anyway, here are the ones that are most noteworthy because they had more stuff than the others, frankly. Dyson Joint Command and Delta Quadra Command had access to singularity cores as well as to secondary deflectors, which were kind of unique and that was kind of cool. Deep Space Nine also had secondary deflectors. I would have expected Deep Space Nine to have more than that because Deep Space Nine's Victory's Life expansion was when things went up to 65, so you would have, expected maybe their vendors to have Mark 11 common weapons and stuff, but it's still Mark 9 like everyone else for some reason. Gonaldo Space Station, which is KDF only access, also has secondary deflectors, which was also weird because this is one of the oldest stations in the game, and it also has secondary deflectors, so that is kind of weird. The weirdest one, though, was Deep Space K7, because not only did it have secondary deflectors, it had Mark 10 very rare space weapons and space equipment as well, which was really weird, and of all 6 general energy types. Now, it does cost a lithium instead of energy credits, so I don't recommend actually buying these things, and at level 65, you can get a lot of common Mark 12 drops anyway, but it is interesting to see that there is still a vendor in the game from a really weird random console on the map that actually sells very rare weapons outside of the fleet. Kind of weird. But, so yeah, in summary here, I looked on basically every social map that I could think of in this game. And yeah, I flew to every single planet to double check and see if there was ground maps. Interacted with almost every single NPC, including finding this funny little dialogue from Admiral Carrick about the Lost Dominion arc, and something that's inconsistent there that I posted on the Still Reddit just for fun. Talking to every single NPC that I could possibly find outside of missions, I couldn't find someone that sold space consoles. The only place I really could find stuff for space consoles that were sold by NPCs were either from the fleet, from the exchange, or if you want to be slimy and be sarcastic about it, technically your replicator also sells them if you recycle them and then buy them back from the recycling. Technically, I guess that counts too. Outside of those situations, I honestly couldn't find any NPCs in the game that actually sold space consoles. So for those of you that also talk to people on the Still Reddit, whenever you're seeing a lot more people that have really weird consoles on their Starship and they aren't level 65 yet, please be really patient with them. And don't just say, wow, you're a noob because you have terrible consoles on your Starship. I've played this game for a while, and I've put some serious time into this, and I couldn't find a single NPC in this game that sold space consoles in this game. No engineering ones, no science ones, no tactical ones. And if I can't find them, that probably means they either don't exist in the game right now, or they're in some very obscure area that I'm not thinking about. If there is an NPC that does sell them, that's not the fleet or the exchange or the recycling bin, please let us all know in the comments, and I'll probably pin it to the top of all the comments, because I've spent a freaking ton amount of time trying to find this inside the game. So I'd really be appreciative if you can actually find it, and if you happen to know where one is. So yeah, be very patient with very new players. Not only may they not understand the mechanics or the best bridge officer abilities to use, but figuring out what consoles to use, and the fact that there's no easy filler consoles besides maybe random RNG drops from missions and a random mission reward. It's really hard to fill in those consoles, which is also why when you get to late 50s in terms of levels, it gets really hard for a lot of these new players if the RNG drops are not in their favor, or they're constantly changing the energy type that they're using on their starship, and well, they don't have an NPC vendor to go to switch out their space consoles for something better, based upon how they're changing the builds on their starship. And in fact, the only place that I've actually found to easily peruse the different options is by looking through the R&D, research and development systems inside the game, which is not something I expect anyone who isn't level 65 yet to actually understand inside of this game. Just saying. Because of that, yeah, just as a TLDR for experienced players versus new players in terms of a lot of this stuff with leveling, and why experienced players don't have this dip in hardness and difficulty in the mid-game. First off, experienced players will often play missions and TFOs to level, and if they're playing missions specifically, it's generally to get a specific weapon or console from a particular mission that might be really strong. New players, it's their first time playing the game. They want to play all the missions in order because they think that that's the best way to play, which I would totally agree with. Unfortunately, because of how the level scaling works now in missions, a lot of the stuff, especially when you get to Delta Quadrant, Iconian War, if you're playing legitimately in order, it might potentially be impossible for some of these new players to actually complete those missions on normal difficulty. Technically possible, but if they're barely grasping a lot of the mechanics that are second nature to a lot of the more experienced players, it's just going to be a very pain and miserable experience for them, and a lot of them will probably just stop playing around level 50, frankly. Level 50, 55, they'll just stop playing like, wow, this game's gotten really hard. And I don't know why it's hard. Because again, the game doesn't really teach you. Second thing is, experienced players, basically all of them in the game have at least one tier 6 starship. Whether they've invested money in this game or not, they probably earned a tier 6 starship in some fashion, whether it's through the summer event, winter event, anniversary event, or the recent autumn event with the Alachi frigate. They'll have at least one tier 6 starship that's a scaling one after the tutorial to help out with the HP issues that free-to-play players have issues with in the level 45 plus area of the game. And because their weapons scale until about level 50, they don't really have to worry as much about replacing those weapons until, well, they're already level 65, and replacing them with RNG drops from their reputations or from TFOs inside the game. Free-to-play players are just using their free starships, which after level 40, HP becomes much more of an issue, and because weapons don't scale, they have to constantly replace them, quite often with whatever random loot that a mission happens to give them, which might not correspond with a given energy type which they've already built their starship around, which can actually hurt their build overall. And then, of course, we have the lack of consoles, which I've already talked about, that there doesn't seem to be any NPC vendor that actually sells them in the game. So, I mean, experienced players probably didn't even realize that this was an issue. In fact, when I was making this video, I was expecting there to be some NPC vendor in the game that sold engineering consoles, science consoles, and tactical consoles. And yet I couldn't find one. I literally could not find one in the game that sold those consoles. So, but most of them don't know at all because, well, with the Admiralty system at level 52, even for me, I typically just use the Admiralty system at level 52, and I just keep on leveling my character until it use the projects there until they're level 65, and then I start playing random TFOs from there. And then I start replacing my equipment with random reputation equipment or equipment that drops from those missions, and then I'm fine and good to go. Additionally, if I really don't want to worry about that, I can always just send account bound items from one character to another, especially characters that have replaced those items with better fleet items and other crafted items, so I can send it to a brand new 65 character, and they have a lot of great equipment that is good to go for a while. Or if I really don't want to do either of those things, I can use an account bank to transfer credits to that character and just have the character buy the equipment that they actually need straight off of the exchange. New players, well, they barely have any ships for the Admiralty system, so leveling to 65 is going to be much slower for them. Additionally, it's their first character if they're a brand new player, so they don't have alternate characters to transfer items from. And also for the exchange, if you're a brand new character of like a month or two, you're not going to know what's necessarily the best values of stuff on the exchange, what stuff you should be paying for different items on the exchange, and different stuff like that. It's easy for these players to get ripped off inside of this game, or to easily be fooled on like the store Reddit as to what things they should be buying immediately off the exchange, or spending money to get some Zen to convert to EC with selling keys on the exchange to try to get something powerful that they think will save them and their probably lackluster build inside the game. Because of all those issues, the only solution that I really have realistically for you, if you're a new player and struggling to find some consoles to use, because you don't have any NPC vendors to buy from what I can find, you're going to have to buy them from the exchange. It's either there or you're going to need to play TFOs and get lucky with some random loot drops to fill in your consoles for engineering, science, and tactical. So, for tactical consoles, here's the names of all the tactical consoles that I would even roughly consider. Highly would recommend one of these 6, depending on what particular type of energy type that you're going for. If you want to do a rainbow build, even though I don't recommend it, directed energy manifold for beam builds, pre-fired chamber for cannon builds, and if you want to do a full torpedo build, warhead yield chamber is the way to go. Target range generally for a lot of these, my recommendation is don't buy anything above 50,000 energy credits, especially because your build's probably going to be pretty lackluster to begin with. Most of these consoles on the exchange in and of themselves are probably going to be a decent improvement above a lot of the relative ones you're going to have already. Of course, obviously compare tooltips to see if one you're buying off the exchange is actually better than something that you have currently on your Starship already. And by the way, for scaling purposes for you all, Mark 10 or Mark X is able to be used at level 40. Mark 12 or Mark XII is able to be used at about level 47. So if you're buying these right at level 40, Mark 12s won't be able to be used for a little while until you level up a couple more levels. If you're level 50 plus, Mark 12 is totally fine to be able to use. Alright, so to use the exchange, go to any of your general social maps, and there's generally going to be an exchange somewhere. If you don't know where it is and you're on one of those maps, just type it in the local chat like, hey, I am a brand new player, where is the exchange? Like, legitimately just say, I'm a brand new player, I'm trying to find the exchange, where is it? And people can help guide you to it if need be. And then once you're there, you'll just click on the access exchange thing, and then this is going to pop up. Don't really worry too much about this particular thing right here. There are other different categories to narrow things down. There's also certain things as well here as well. For individual prices for individual equipment, you're not going to worry about this. Generally, ascending price is going to be fine. If you're buying multiples of something and some things can be sold in multiples, you want to search by ascending price per unit. But for us here in this video, we're not really worried too much about that. So we'll search for whatever console we're looking for. I just have typed in phaser relay. In habit, I typically type in mark and then a certain mark rarity. I often look for mark 15s of certain things because I don't really like upgrading as much. Just my thing. And then you'll just go ahead and click search. And then you have a lot of things that pop up. Now in this particular circumstance, I actually should have bought the uncommon mark 11 because that was going to be better damage than the mark 12 common. The higher the rarity, the lower the mark can be to still do the same type of damage roughly, which means if it's a mark 15 epic thing, there's nothing that can actually compare to it in terms of whatever its stats are going to be. But for this example, I just went ahead and just bought the cheapest thing here. It'll give you a confirmation asking, do you really want to buy this thing? This is here just because, especially if you're on the exchange trying to buy something more expensive, like a Starship, which is in the hundreds of millions of energy credits, you don't want to accidentally buy the wrong Starship, which many people have done before. And it's also why a lot of Starships, if they have a tier 5 version and they make a tier 6 nowadays, they will actually change the name of the Starship for its tier 6 version, so that whenever you search for whatever given XYZ Starship, you can type in the name and narrow out the tier 5 or the tier 6, so that tier 5/tier 6 confusion doesn't exist anymore as much in the most latest types of Starships inside the game. So yeah, there'll be this confirmation for purchase, and then once you purchased it, this little thing's going to pop up saying, hey, this thing's been added to your inventory, and it's added to your inventory, or if you don't have room in your inventory, it'll be added to your overflow bag. So you'll have to empty things out of your inventory in order to get it into your inventory to be able to use it. And so yeah, that's generally how that works. Definitely start with your tactical consoles first. That is the most important thing to get filled out for your Starship. Then from there, it's other consoles that you want if you want specific ones for your engineering and science. Those ones aren't necessarily as needed, but it's definitely nice to put more meaningful consoles in there too. So, in conclusion here, Cryptic Studios, if you are listening or watching this video, my plea to you today is please add NPC vendors to the game, whether that's directly to the vendors that already exist or separate NPC vendors that sell Starship consoles. Please, please, please do this. You can keep the rarities that already exist for other weapons and stuff with common Mark 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. Mark 11 would probably also prefer to add as well because we have Mark 15 now. So when it comes to those vendors, I'm going to outline the engineering, science, attack consoles I think you should at minimum add. For engineering, here are the 4 that I recommend you add. I recommend adding Neutronium Alloy because this is the generalist best damage resistance rating console in the game, because it gives general resistance to all types of damage in the game, and is a general counter to being able to survive through spike damage like torpedoes, mines, and spike science types of abilities. Then there is the Sif Generator, which gives you passive hull regeneration, which is a small counter to sustained damage against you, like against energy weapons from NPCs, especially for common or normal difficulty missions. This is actually a pretty decent counter against those types of enemies. It makes you able to basically like hull regen through the damage, especially if you don't have very many hull healing abilities on your Starship. EPS Flow Regulator gives you extra power transfer rate, which, for lack of a better term, because your early types of builds aren't going to have a lot of power cost reduction on them, this translates into just extra damage on your starship. I'm not going to go into the math in this video, but that's what it basically does. And then general RCS accelerators give you additional turning, which makes it easier for, doing cannon types of builds, especially, without the competitive engines from a different reputation once you're 65 plus. For science consoles, here are the 4 that I feel that need to be added to a vendor like this. The particle generator gives you exotic particle generator skill, which is basically your general damage console. Cryptic generator gives you control expertise as well as resistance to control effects. That's something unique that they added a couple of years ago when they combined a lot of things in science to make it more simplified. Flow capacitor is the same thing except against drain effects. Now it amplifies the drain effects that your Starship deals, as well as it gives you extra resistances to those types of drains being inflicted upon your Starship as well. And then for the general survivor type of thing, the emitter array gives an enhancement to the whole healing that your Starship is doing. For tactical consoles, you've already seen this already, right before I talked about the exchange. Here are the 6 general energy types: phase disruptor, plasma, tetra, polaron, and antiproton. They each have their own phrase afterwards as to what type of tactical console it is. Yes, your endgame builds off the fleets will use vulnerability exploiters and such, and it'll be just have, let's say whatever enhancement of I just said afterwards from those. Additionally, if you want to do a beam build, the directed energy distribution manifold is the way to go. Cannon builds, pre-fire chamber is the way to go, and warhead yield chamber is for torpedoes. By the way, pre-fire chamber enhances cannons and turrets, by the way, just in case you all were curious about that. But yeah, that's Cryptic. If you take one thing from my video, please add an NPC console vendor with those consoles into the game, or if it's already in the game, please make it a lot more prevalent that those vendors actually exist inside the game. So yeah, hopefully y'all enjoyed this video. I did have a little bit of ranting in this video, and I am sorry for that. I tried to limit it as much as I possibly could, but I did spend a week trying to find an NPC vendor that sold space consoles, so I am a little irritated that I could not find one. If you know of one that's not from the fleet or from the exchange, feel free to let us all know in the comments, and I'll probably the first one of you that mentions something, and I can verify that that's actually the case. I will pin your comment to the top of all the comments so that everyone can see how smart you are inside this game. Also, as a note for you all, just as for some news, the Jula mission and TFO has been delayed. They did mention in like a 10-4 weekly stream a week or two ago that there was some technical things that they were having issues with, plus that they were needing to spend more time on doing stuff for the anniversary, whatever story you want to believe from that. But basically, because of that, we have our second featured TFO thing for a couple of weeks is going to be the modified version of the breach, and it's going to be the event version of the breach, which is a little bit shorter than the normal TFO. It also happens to award more marks than the longer version, which is kind of weird, but if you don't want to do that TFO, they also are adding some more Voth patrols as well. Frankly, because this mission is already generally one of the longer ones in the game for TFOs, because of how much just flying you end up doing this mission. Like, I think there's like almost like, gosh, it's gotta be like, it feels like there's at least like 4 minutes of just flying around the mission to get to different places. So that's one of the only annoying things about this mission, and it's why I like to bring a Romulan Battlecloak starship in this mission, so I can just do evasive maneuvers, merge power to engines, and like blast through it as fast as I can. But the mission is totally a fine mission. It's just the beginning's a little bit slow. If we're able to start with just assaulting the outside and going straight in, I think this mission would actually be okay. But that's just me personally. So yeah, that should be starting, I believe, next week. We might have a new Starship coming out soon, if not today, sometime next week. They should ideally be announcing a new Starship. It's been a little while, so they probably will soon. Maybe it's the Tier 6 version of the Voth Bulwark. Who knows? We'll see soon enough. So yeah, thank you all for watching. My ground builds video for general DPS builds will be coming out early next week, like Monday or Tuesday as well. Combined with some fun stuff the week thereafter. Thank you all for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.